Alright guys, so we are chapter 2. Chapter 2. Alright, voices, entertainment, alright? Class begins. Section 3 is economic systems. Enough. All right, economic systems. And economic system is the type of economy. Question, yeah?
What page?
Page is 47. Yes, 47. So if you want, you can. 47. Number 1 is fairly straightforward. Market economy. When we say market economy, page 47, we usually mean, girls, okay? We usually mean free market economy. There is, when we say market economy, we mean minimal government intervention. The government does not intervene much. There are few government rules, few government regulations. There is not really an aggressive monetary policy, and the government takes a relatively small share of the economy. Let me see if I can find my red pen over here. Okay. Sometimes they call it, they use the French word laissez-faire. Laissez-faire economy basically means free economy, libertarian economy. So laissez-faire means let them do their thing, basically. And this is how Great Britain was in the 17th, no, let's say 18th century and 19th century. This is how the United States was in the 18th century and 19th century. Usually, laissez-faire economies work very well. They grow very fast. They develop very quickly. They encourage entrepreneurs to open businesses. Coupled with a decent legal system which protects property rights, it allows for rapid accumulation of capital, and capital growth means growth in productivity, growth in salaries, growth in standards of living, and growing prosperity. So this usually is a very well-functioning system when it's based with good, proper legal system. The other extreme is called command economy. A command economy, basically the government decides what is done, when it's done, how it's produced, who produces it, what's the pricing going to be. Sometimes we also call it a planned economy. The same thing, planned economy. This is the socialist type economies, the economy of the Soviet Union, the economies of the Soviet bloc, like my home country, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary. Eastern Germany was also part of that bloc. Outside of Europe, you had China. China was a planned economy. And Cuba, North Korea. Planned economies and in general command economies are a proven failure. Every time a government has tried it, it has always failed. We've never had an economy that would possibly ever succeed in a planned or in a command economy. And the reason is that an economy has a certain amount of scarce resources, and in a command economy there is too much waste where the government is wasting a lot of resources, a lot of people are not utilized properly, and at the same time, consumer preferences are not satisfied. Consumers want one type of product, but the command economy produces a completely different type of product. So there is a gross mismatch between supply and demand. Consumers like to eat tomatoes, but the economy produces cucumbers, okay? It's a basic problem. Or consumers would like to eat more onions, but the economy produces more garlic. Fundamental problem where you got mismatch between demand and supply. And then you got a mixed economy. And this is where most of the world operates today. Mixed economy will be very well known, will be the French economy, where we have a significant government intervention, where we have significant and a lot of government regulations, where governments like to control specific sectors which they think are very important for the economy and are very critical. Example would be when I was working in Macau and teaching in Macau and talked to the students, I asked them, well, can you open a mobile operator? They say, no. There's just no way. Government's got a firm grip on communications. There is no way you can do anything about it without the big, strong help of the government. Also, government, Macau is based on gambling, okay? It's got a lot of casinos in there. It's kind of like the Las Vegas of Asia. It's actually, for the last 2 years, has been netting more revenues than Las Vegas itself. It's impossible to open a casino. Government's too deep into there. But if you try to open any other business, you two guys, come on, separate already, okay? You just keep talking, yeah, the two of you, yeah, behind the camera, right? Just separate a little bit, okay? I mean, too much talking all the time. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So, back to Macau. If you want to open a restaurant, no problem. You want to open a shop, very easy, very libertarian, no problem. The economy is amazingly free, amazingly libertarian, amazingly pro-business, as long as you don't touch these 4 or these 5 critical industries. Okay? So, these would be a mixed economy. Other types of many Asian economies are mixed. Korean government intervenes heavily into their economy. They steer a lot of industries. They think many industries are very important and strategic, so they help, they support those industries. Samsung is supported by the government. From what I understand, it's actually technically a bankrupt company, can't make up enough profits to feed itself, so it's using taxpayer money, but it's considered strategic. Yeah, Germany to a great extent is a mixed economy. Sweden to a great extent is a mixed economy. Finland might be, so most of the Nordic countries will be relatively mixed economies. So most of Europe's economies would be relatively mixed. Today, we can even consider the US economy, which has been moving from fairly free economy, is moving more and more steadily towards a command economy. Today, the US economy is fairly mixed and fairly heavily regulated, and the government intervenes in practically almost everything. Today, you got very few economies which were left to be relatively free. In general, the trend, the natural trend of economies is to swing between relatively free and between relatively planned. Usually what happens is governments naturally will tend towards more and more and more in command economy, will be also relatively mixed economy. We can also call it interventionists, where governments intervene in more and more and more of the economy. As governments intervene more and more, the economy becomes less and less and less efficient, to the point where it's a tremendous crisis or just a major economic collapse, where the economy becomes so totally dysfunctional. And society is close to a revolt, to the point where the government just got to step in and release its grip on the economy. And this is what happened. This is how it's called Reaganomics, or the Reagan Revolution, which was also actually started by Margaret Thatcher, where the British economy was totally dysfunctional. It was a terrible economy. It was on the verge of a major collapse. Great Britain was practically bankrupt. The whole country was bankrupt. Most of its businesses were bankrupt. And they simply had to liberalize the whole economy, well, not the whole, most of the economy completely. And part of the liberalization process was nationalization. They simply sold out all of those government enterprises, government businesses, which were formerly inefficient. They privatized them. To privatize means to move or to transfer ownership from the government to the private sector. In Eastern Europe, we also were fairly command economies. We moved to a mixed economy where the governments privatized a lot of businesses. And privatization usually gives a new life on the economy. And here's the key: if it is coupled with significant government spending. In other words, the government share of the economy shrinks significantly. So mixed economies usually get worse and worse and worse and worse over time, until you reach a total crisis and usually an economic collapse. And then the government is chastened, thrown out, and a new government comes in, which liberalizes, gives a new lease of life on the economy, and the cycle begins over and over again. Now the country, which is fairly mixed economy, which is in serious trouble, almost on the verge of a collapse, is France. So France is going to be a big, giant monster crisis, which is coming to Europe probably very soon. The crisis, which has already come and is now evolving, of a major mixed economy, which is totally dysfunctional, would be Italy. Of course, when we talk about these southern European countries like Greece, Greece is a mixed economy with very big government intervention, and that explains why they're in such a deep trouble. Same thing with Italy. Huge government share. Government intervenes in everything. That's why they're in deep trouble. Same thing France, same thing Spain, same thing Portugal. Government intervenes an awful lot in practically everything. Government's got too much of a share in the economy, and every time there is a problem, the government tries to fix it. And the government's fix is always the same: borrow more money and spend it on the problem. Unfortunately, spending money on a problem, it has proven not to fix the problem. But unfortunately, that's how governments think. The equivalent is for the fat guy who's relatively sick and doesn't have much energy. He doesn't feel energetic. He doesn't feel like running, doesn't feel good. And the solution is, oh, you don't have energy, you're not strong enough, you gotta eat more. Okay? Well, common sense tells you that by eating more, the fat guy isn't gonna get a whole lot better. Most likely, he's gonna get a lot worse. All right, so that completes a short review into section number 3. Number 4, next section will be, let me see, yes, is legal systems. Legal systems will have a number of different legal systems. This is actually a fairly long, difficult section. So the first type is called common law. Common law was developed and used and practiced most well developed in Great Britain. Its three pillars are tradition, second pillar custom, and the third one is precedent. Tradition refers to the country's legal history. Hey, this is what our histories are. This is how we evolve over time. Custom is, let's make sure that I get this right, the way in which the laws are applied in specific cases, in specific occasions. So, how the law is applied. And precedent means that a specific case would become later on a case law. In other words, judges will follow previous cases. So they're based mostly, again, on history, on tradition, on the evolution of the system. That's common law. Its main advantage is flexibility. Main advantage is it is relatively flexible. In other words, the law is not codified in great detail. The other type of legal system is called civil law, and sometimes it is called or known as continental law. This is the type that most European countries, like Germany and France, would use. It is a very detailed set of laws, rules, and regulations. And very detailed. It's going to be huge. For everything, there will be very many major details provided for every single thing. Here in common law, judges would usually interpret the law, and can possibly occasionally change a little bit. Here, the law is written. Judges would not interpret it. They will simply follow it, okay? They'll simply, basically, enforce it. They'll simply follow whatever the law says. In business, you have contracts. With contracts, according to common law, because common law is not very specific, contracts will be huge because they'll be specifying an awful lot of details. Every little detail will be written into the contract. According to civil law, contracts could be and would be relatively short because the law already specifies most of the things the way they are, and you don't need to copy these things into the contract. Or if you write something in the contract which violates the civil law, you will, basically, that part will be worthless and will not be enforced at all. So contracts here are fairly short, fairly clean. Contracts here could be very long, very complicated, very detailed. But at the same time, these are relatively flexible and these are relatively inflexible. Each system has proven to have a lot of major advantages and a lot of major disadvantages. And again, it's a matter of choice. But both of them seem to work very well. Next type is called theocratic. Theocratic means power of the church, power of the clergy. It basically means religious law. Religious law. Today, it's mostly Muslims would usually apply. The fundamental book will be the Quran, and usually Muslim countries will be run under theocratic law. The leader would be Saudi Arabia. But you may also have Jews running on their, at least historically, Jewish laws, and you may also have Hindus running on their old religious Hindu law. These are Jewish and Hindu law practices were mostly back in the history. Now certain areas and certain small mini societies or subcultures will practice still these religious types of laws, but the big one is for Muslim countries. So if you're running and operating a multinational corporation in a major Muslim country, you have to be aware to what extent the country runs on theocratic law, in other words, is run on religious law, as opposed to a purely civil law. Most of the times, they'll try to have it both ways. They like to run on Muslim law, religious law, because that's what Muslims do and like to do. But they also want to be based on civil law. Now, what we want to run like a modern European country. And they like to have it both ways, and when you try to have it both ways, it usually doesn't work. It is usually trying to run a mixture is a proven failure. But just because it's a failure doesn't mean they would change. They will not change. They'll keep trying over and over and over. They'll keep trying a decade after a decade after a decade. And even though it's a failure, they will just keep trying, okay? Instead of changing their ways. Again, they choose to fail, and it's their decision. That's their culture. That's their religion. That's their way of thinking and their way of life. Usually, most economies that are run under theocratic law are relatively poor and relatively undeveloped. Okay, they just can't get up to a developed state. All right, let's see what else we got here. All right, next within the legal system is differences in a contract law. All right, let's first clarify what is important for an economy. For an economy, within the legal system, two things are extraordinarily important. Two things determine whether the system will run well, the economy will run well or not. First one is contract law, and the second one is property rights. Both of these are absolutely necessary. They are required to function properly in order for the economy to function properly. So you can be sure that poor contract law will mean a bad economy. That's an easy forecast. And you can be equally sure that poor property rights will be also result in a poorly functioning economy. Property rights are important. People should have their secure right to property. They should know that if they have the property, it will not be stolen from them. If they have the property, they can use it the way they want to use it. They can lease it when they want to lease it. They can sell it the way they want to sell it. In other words, they can dispose it every possible way, and that the property will not be stolen from them, whether by the mafia or by the government itself. Usually what happens is most often property rights are actually, the biggest problem is not that a thief will come, and it's not the mafia that will come after you. Most of the times the property rights are usually encroached by the government. The biggest threat to property rights is actually the government. And it happens all the time in non-civilized or non-advanced countries, non-developed countries. In other words, if a country is developed, you know you're going to have good property rights, okay? Without good property rights, it would never become developed in the first place, okay? But with bad property rights, come on guys, all right? All right, you can talk all the way after that, all right? But without property rights, it's very, very difficult to usually. And sometimes property rights will usually go together with so-called freedoms. And when we say freedoms, we do not just mean human freedoms. We mean mostly economic freedoms. And these freedoms are pretty much the same as here, the market economy. We call the free market economy or the laissez-faire freedoms. So you're relatively free economically, and your property is very secure. And where property is very secure, you can accumulate more and more property. And we like to say that this helps, or this is extremely important for the accumulation of capital. So we write capital accumulation. Capital accumulation. So if property rights are well protected, this helps accumulate capital, and accumulated capital will result in a prosperity and higher standard of living. If property is not secure, you would not accumulate capital in your home country. Example of poor property rights will be in Russia. And Russia is not protecting well its, the property of people and even of businesses. And both the mafia, Russian mafia, will go after money, and at the same time the government will go after money. So if you're in Russia, you're not going to, you're not going to be accumulating and putting your money back into the Russian economy and in Russian banks. You will move it to Swiss banks or to Cyprus or to some other place, some other country where property is a little better secure. Similar thing happens in many Muslim countries which are relatively theocratic and autocratic at the same time. For most of them, property rights are not actually well secure, and that's why they will move money to certain countries. So I was working in Bahrain. Bahrain will be the Switzerland of the Middle East, and a tiny little country the size of Phuket, was going to be about, let's say, 60, 70 kilometers by 20 kilometers. It's a tiny little country. We'll have 400 banks, about 200 commercial banks, and about 200 investment banks. And it's going to be the banking center of the Middle East, or it has been for a long time, because now Dubai wants to take over the banking center of the Middle East. So, Bahrain is a very, very, very focused on protecting property rights and on good banking rights so that you're from any other nearby country, whether it's Iran or Iraq. I mean, again, you got to understand that even though you have this extraordinary divide between Shias and Sunnis, and they may be fighting and they may be doing wars and all the other things, when it comes to money, there are no Shias and there are no Sunni. Money is money, okay? And they all welcome it. Doesn't matter where it's coming from. Same thing with Switzerland. Switzerland doesn't care whether it's blood money, whether it's good money, whether it's extortion money, whether it's stolen money, whether it's bribe money, whether it's honest money. Doesn't matter what it is. They welcome the money and secure it and protect it. All right, back to contract law. Okay, so a contract is simply an agreement, and a written contract will be a document which specifies the terms and conditions of a particular agreement, whether it's to buy and sell, to rent or lease, to employ, or whatever the business transaction is. And contract law will represent the workings of the system which enforces different contracts. So it's important not just to have a good contract law where the law itself is well made, but that you also have a good working legal system where you actually can go to the court and the court will resolve it quickly, efficiently, and cheaply. Okay? You need to be able to go to the court, and when you go to the court will resolve it. If it's going to take 2, 3, 5 years for the court to resolve a problem, you would not even bother with it. Okay? And if that's the case, then contract law is not well functioning, and the economy will be fundamentally dysfunctional. Let's see what we have here. Arbitration. All right. Another part within the legal system, which is has proven to be very important. It's kind of like in between. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it's everywhere in every economy, is corruption. Corruption is tricky everywhere, every time. It is represented as terrible, as evil, as something that we should avoid, and it's not really true. You got what's called good corruption, and you got bad corruption. Okay, good corruption is one which makes the economy more efficient. Good corruption is usually one which circumvents highly restrictive rules and regulation and basically smooths the economy. For example, the government says you need to go through these 27 steps to get a building permit so you can build yourself a tiny little house. We're not talking about big business, we're not talking about anything special, okay? And in this particular case, a little corruption, meaning a bribe of $2,000 US or $5,000 US dollars, is going to get your building permit in 2 days. Done, okay? You can go, you can build, okay? So instead of wasting 2 years, instead of wasting a lot of your own time, instead of wasting a lot of your own money, instead of involving 2, 3, or 5 different lawyers, instead of going to 20 different agencies, instead of involving probably hundreds of bureaucrats and administrators, and taking a lot of time, effort, resources, and everything, you just go through it, you pay your little bribe, and then you're done, okay? So, corruption, let's provide, these are examples, doesn't mean, again, I'm just trying to give you an illustration, will be China and India will have a lot. And in China, you have a relatively efficient corruption, and in India, it is relatively inefficient. So let's try and see what is China, what does it mean, efficient corruption? Means if you're able to get to the right person, to the right bureaucrat, to the right administrator, when you give them the right bribe, the bribe will immediately go up the chain. So, if there's, let's say, 1 million, the guy's going to keep 200,000, 300,000 for himself. He's going to pass up the chain, and then the guy up the chain is going to pass up the money up the chain, so that as it lubricates the whole chain, everything gets cleared across the chain, and things get done quickly and efficiently, and there are no roadblocks. In other words, you pay the bribe, and the job gets done. That's what's important. Important is to get the job done. In India, it is not like that. You got very unclear rules. You got very unclear regulations. You got a hungry bureaucracy. Again, bureaucracy in China is hungry too. But as soon as you pay one bribe, you suddenly find another roadblock, and you're in the hands of another bureaucrat. You say, but I already paid the bribe. It says, yeah, you paid somebody else. Now you're going to pay me, okay? And then you're sick and tired. You pay this guy, and then 3 days later, you got another roadblock. You got to pay another guy, and then another guy. So what the problem with Indian bribery and corruption is that it is uncertain. It is difficult to forecast. It is difficult to plan. They get so many bribes along the way. For example, you want to build yourself and open a little hotel. I don't know, 3 stories, 10 rooms. It's going to make the hotel for you, I don't know. Let's say, I'm just picking a number, 100,000 a year. And the whole hotel is going to be worth to you at most $500,000 or $1 million in total capital value. And they try to extract a bribe after a bribe after a bribe after a bribe, a whole lot of money, to the point where if you're going to be paying all of this bribe money, you're going to be losing on the hotel, and it's not worth doing the hotel. So you already pay 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 in bribes. You just give up and say, the hell with it. I don't want to do it anymore. So here, bribery is just one roadblock after another roadblock. It takes more time. It is very inefficient. And it just keeps creating more problems and more problems and more problems. So the more bribes you pay, the more people open their mouth for even more bribes. And that's a disaster for the economy. In China, not exactly like that. You should be smart enough to figure out whom to pay. As soon as you pay, things get moving, and they keep moving. You don't get more roadblocks. But anyway, corruption is practically everywhere in the world. It is a, nevertheless, tremendous problem. Corruption is, the economic sense is that of an indirect tax. The difference is that as a businessman, you do pay the tax, but it doesn't go in the pocket of the government, but goes in the pocket of the government's bureaucrat. And he takes it home and buys him a villa or whatever else he's gonna. So it is a burden on the economy. It's a burden on the economy. It makes the economy inefficient. And major corruption means big problems for the economy. Small corruption is not a big. I mean, corruption always exists. The question is how big, how small. Let's see what else we have. Property rights, okay. Part of property rights here will be, so property rights, it could be the government that goes after your money. That's a bigger problem. Most countries have it. And many countries will have a mafia problem. You got some mafia in the US. You got a fairly large mafia in Italy. You got a fairly large mafia in Russia, the Russian mafia. You actually got a Japanese mafia that will be the Yakuza. You got a large mafia, very well developed in China. These will be the Chinese triads and so on. So mafia could represent a major threat to any business, especially any successful or good business. So if you are doing an international business, you gotta be aware of the mafia, if there is, and what it is. You gotta be aware of how the government will be running and how well protected your property rights will be. And you gotta be very careful about corruption. Or you just gotta be prepared to pay bribes, and you also gotta be very well educated. You gotta learn and know where to pay, whom to pay, how much to pay, what time of form to pay. So if you're gonna be paying, you gotta pay the right way to the right people. Very important. Let's see what else we have here. Sometimes corruption is institutionalized by the leader himself, by the president himself. The two major examples will be Suharto in Indonesia, who ran the economy. He ran it autocratically. It was a totalitarian system. And he will install his relatives and friends. His whole family will install everywhere in the government, in all major businesses. And if you're a foreign business, you want to run a business, you gotta pay a bribe to the Suharto family or the Suharto regime, okay? Similar thing was with Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines. Quite the same. The whole government is corrupt. It is corrupt at the very top. And if the top is corrupt, corruption's gonna go all the way. And this is totally destructive for the economy. This is how, and this is why, the Indonesian economy, which was in fairly good shape, was almost destroyed. And this is also why the Philippine economy, what most people, now everybody understands and sees that the Philippines is extraordinarily poor country, one of the poorest countries in the world. And you get to see Filipinos spread everywhere around the world working for a little better jobs. I mean, when I was flying to work to Macau, I would fly from Bulgaria through Frankfurt to Hong Kong, and the Frankfurt airport, I'd see everywhere Filipinos cleaning the airport for extremely low salaries. The reason for these Filipinos working dirt cheap everywhere in the world, I mean, you have tens of thousands of them in the, millions of them in the Middle East, tens of thousands in a tiny little country like Bahrain only, is the corrupt regime of Ferdinand Marcos, who literally destroyed the whole economy. Philippines was the second, after World War II, was the second richest Asian economy. It was more rich than Indonesia, than China, than Taiwan, than Hong Kong. It was the second after. Come on, girls. All right, enough. All right, enough talk. Okay. So it was the second richest after Japan. And a totalitarian regime will move it from number 2 in Asia to one of the worst in Asia. Okay, let's see what we have over here. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. A little bit of time for, okay. The next thing within the legal system is intellectual property. Intellectual property will be basically patents, copyrights, and trademarks. And a patent is a specific protection related to a product or a process, like a production process, okay? The next one, the copyright will be a protection to a work of art, like a book, like a music, like a song, like a play. And then a trademark will be a protection, of a specific logo or a brand name. Example will be that little apple that you see over here, that little apple that you see over there on the laptops, or the little apple that you see on your iPhones. That will be the brand name and the logo of the Apple company that makes the iPads, the iPhones, and the toys in general. And many countries usually don't care about protecting intellectual property. So if you're international business, sometimes you may, without knowing, give away your intellectual property, and your intellectual property will be stolen. You walk here around the beaches in Phuket, and you're going to see so many CDs with movies. These are, the not real, actual, genuine. They've been pirated copies of different movies. So you can get to buy a lot of cheap movies. You can get to buy all sorts of music, and everything's pretty much pirated, okay? So many countries don't protect intellectual property rights, and it's a big, big problem. Today, it is considered that the biggest violator of all sorts of intellectual property rights will be China. But in general, almost everywhere in Asia, intellectual property rights are not respected. So again, running a business, you have to be very, very, very careful. And the last part before we take the break is the section, which is page 55, product safety. Product safety and product liability. And the logic behind product safety is exactly the same as with environmental protection. When economies are not very well developed, nobody worries about the product safety. People worry about the product itself. They just want to get the product. Country is poor. Just getting the product is important. Whether it's safe or not safe is not as important as long as you have it. As the economy develops, people get more satisfied, they get to worry more about safety. Today, the United States pretends to be the leader in the world on safety, but safety, the leader is pretty much Europe. And Americans don't care, American business, American government don't care too much about product safety. American government today cares more about the profits of corporations. So the American government has steadily lowered and lowered and lowered and lowered the standards, where a lot of extremely unsafe products are sold in the US markets, which will be pretty much banned in Europe. Example, one illustration is the so-called GMO, genetically modified organisms. These are genetically engineered foods, which are well known and they're proven, and you have so much evidence where it's crystal clear that they would destroy your health in the long term. You eat GMOs for 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to be a health wreck if you can live that long. Okay? They have been proven to cause hundreds of different diseases. Okay? They make you sick. And therefore, of course, they're forbidden in most European countries, but not in the US. The US government encourages their production. Okay? The US government will eliminate any roadblock for these products. Now, back to product safety. Again, many Asian countries are not really concerned about product safety and are not really concerned about safe working conditions. So it is a lot easier to sell relatively unsafe products or to use unsafe working conditions, which are a lot cheaper. Let's write it out just to understand. I mean, it's amazingly simple, but let's write it out. Safety is costly. It costs money. Safety is very, and can be very expensive. That's why rich countries can afford it, and poor countries cannot afford it. And that's the key to safety. Safety costs an awful lot of money. So if you're a rich Germany, you can afford safer products because it's relatively costlier to manufacture and produce. You can afford safer working conditions, okay, because the economy can bear it. In Indonesia, you can't. In Malaysia, you probably can't. In the Philippines, you can't, okay? You just want to get a job. Safe or no safe doesn't matter. Otherwise, you're starving. And you got 3 or 5 children that are starving too and getting sick because of malnutrition. All right, let's see if I missed anything. Good enough. Take a 10-minute break.